everyone who's really paying attention to what's going in Ukraine. One small correction: I've just joined a party of Arseniy Yatsenyuk-Fronsmin. I'm a member of the party for 4 days, but that was a long way when we made our negotiations and made our good projects together. So finally, that was a final and well-prepared decision. And actually, it is really hard for me to speak about Ukraine in general terms, because I think that something may be interesting for you, something you already know. But what is really going on is that we have a really hard time, and this season that started on the 24th of August is the hardest season for 4 years. I mean, politically. And we have some new trends we've never had in our politics. Trend number 1, we have a political process called criminal one against Tymoshenko, but everyone understands, and we've got a huge pressure from US and EU on our authorities to make that understand as a political process. Trend number 2, which is really new for our political sphere, is to see opposition united. Because the Tymoshenko case really managed to unite opposition all over that, just in understanding that if we do not unite our forces to protect her, to protect the possibility of freedom of speech and freedom of to oppose to the authority, then we'll be next. And the hugest risks of this political process are not only the possible isolation of Ukraine and possible worsening of international relations, but the hugest risk of this process is that new elites won't come to politics, because they know they will be next. And it is really hard for us to come to businessmen, like middle class businessmen, asking for money for a party, for oppositional party, because they know that they have tax authorities and other ways to push business, not to finance opposition and to make us like isolated in our own country. And the tendency number 3, that is really a miracle for us, but not a miracle that really happens, is that we are now appointed to be an enemy of Russia. Like a week or 2 ago, we've heard from national channel, Russian national channel, channel number 1, that Yanukovych is not in favor of Moscow anymore. He is hardly criticized for his ideas to change the gas contract. And frankly speaking, this gas contract is something that really make our budget never come to the end. Because when we will keep this gas price next year, we'll be bankrupt. And only with the help of foreign credits we could make the budget happen. But the more credits we take, the more bankruptcy we expect next years. That is obvious for us. And of course, the bad timing of this is that presidential election campaign takes place in Russia, and we are appointed to be enemies. And we really suffer the information war against us. We really suffer the situation. Here is a joke in Kyiv that the more negotiations with Russia, the more patriotic he'll be. So we see the Azarov case that started as a pro-Russian politics, and now his rhetoric is rather against that, presuming the national interests in gas are prevailing the pro-Russian topic. So these are the trends right now in the politics. But we have to focus on what will be next. And we expect that the democracy projects and democracy process at all will suffer a lot. As it's not only the Tymoshenko case, it's also the hard times for business that suffer not only economic crisis, but the huge inside pressure from tax and other authorities. And it will be hard times for democracy at all. And we expect that next elections, next parliamentarian elections that will take time next fall, 2012, will also be the fight for democracy. There are only rumors. Nobody knows what would be the law on parliamentarian elections, but if before Tymoshenko was put in jail, there were rumors that there will be 50-50 system, so 50% of Verkhovna Rada could be elected by party lists and 50 by majoritarian voting. So now the situation has changed, and rumors, because we could rely only on rumors, so no official information is available, but rumors tell that there will be only party lists. The main argument for Yanukovych to change his attitude to the electoral legislation was that in 2004 there were majoritarian deputies who failed to support Kuchma and ran to Yushchenko. That is why he would like to be sure that those deputies who will be in the party lists will be more loyal to him for future. But there is also a huge fight for fraction, and maybe you've noticed that last week there was a dramatic change in Nasha Ukraina fraction, and we've kicked off Tushka. I don't know whether you know what Tushka means. It's a Ukrainian word for beheaded body of hen. We call Tushka deputies who failed to be loyal to their parties and jumped into the coalition with Party of Regions. And we kicked off the Tushkas that makes us not as numerous as we were previous, but it is all, first of all, it is all about the control, not all over the fraction, but the fraction has a right to form the electoral commissions, so those who count voices. It is only Ukrainian notion that elections are won not by those who take more votes, but by those who count those votes. And that was also the reason why Nasha Ukraina finally kicked off Tushkas, because there would be a dramatic fight for those who will support, who will appoint those who will be in the electoral commissions. So this is just like a general picture. If you would like me to be more precise in some spheres, I would rather choose education, because I'm the one who is doing a lot of education stuff in the parliament, and that is my main topic. But it is so much politics in education right now. When we talk about the minister, a few months ago, Mr. Kramer came to Kyiv and advised Yanukovych to resign to Machnik. The time this message made a huge turmoil, but no result. And I usually ask myself why he's keeping this ministry in his place, as everyone knows that he's ruining the rating for the president. Everyone knows that he's doing the controversial way to what Yanukovych promised as a president in education, but what are the reasons to keep him? And trying our best to guess, we've asked a lot of that questions towards people who are in Banco One-Up, in presidential administration, and we've heard two main arguments. Argument number one, it's a Kremlin person. So I don't know for sure, but taking into account his pro-Russian politics and taking into account that the very day Yanukovych returned from Warsaw last week, where he was made understand that pro-European policy will be broken if he will continue Tymoshenko case and other, that very day Lobachkin make a hint that Tabachnik will be fired. I do connect these two events. But the second reason is far more horrible for me, and I've heard it 3 times from 3 different people from administration and party of regions who know the situation better than I do. They told me, all this law on higher education that creates a pyramidal system when the minister decides not only whom to put as a rector of any university, which money would go to which university, and we have a huge fight for state money. For example, Kyiv-Mohyla Academy lost its state paid places just for criticizing Tabachnik, and those universities who are more loyal to Tabachnik got that places. But frankly speaking, the reason why Tabachnik is still in place, those people told me, is that he would like to create this pyramid of the universities to rule the rectors, so the rectors can rule the students. It is something up to from 3 to 5 million of votes that students can give. And that is a huge electoral reason why Tabachnik is still in place. And just to specify the procedure, that is, 1 signature of president is enough to make him go. There is no voting of parliament is needed anymore. Under the new constitutional reform, just 1 signature. And that should be a huge reason why the signature is not like that.
Our next speaker or commentator is Dr. David Kramer, and welcome to this session.
This is, I think, a very difficult time that Ukraine is in, and just today, some of you may have seen an IFES poll that came out, the International Foundation for Electoral Systems, and some of the numbers here I think are really cause for some concern, and I'll just cite 2 here. It says that last year, following the election of President Yanukovych, in February, 21% of Ukrainians surveyed said they thought the country was headed for stability, up significantly from 7% in 2009. That's actually a very revealing figure about the 2009 number, even more than last year. In 2011, i.e. this year, the number of people who felt Ukraine was headed for stability has fallen back down to 12%. And that, I think, is a rather disturbing indication. One other is that 58% of those surveyed said that they were concerned or alarmed about the Yanukovych administration's respect for rights and freedoms. That number, too, strikes me as rather high, and it reflects that the concerns that have been expressed about the direction of the Ukrainian government in the area of democracy and freedom and human rights are not simply those coming from the West. They're not simply those coming from EU capitals or from Washington or from organizations like Freedom House, but I think they're starting to be felt inside the country too. And let me be clear, as one, and Lesya very kindly mentioned the report that I was part of that Freedom House issued called Sounding the Alarm, which is on our website. I forgot to bring a copy with me, with Damon Wilson from Atlantic Council and Robert Nurek, who also participated. That report was done based on a trip to Ukraine that the 3 of us, along with Evan Alterman and our program here, took in February. It was released in April here in Washington, and then we went to Ukraine to release the report in June. And it was done, I want to be clear, in the spirit of people who care deeply about Ukraine, who really want to see Ukraine succeed, who want to see Ukraine become more deeply integrated into the Euro-Atlantic community, we do want to see the deep and comprehensive free trade agreement finalized between Ukraine and the EU, the association agreement finalized between Ukraine and the EU, other measures, and a deepening of ties between the United States and Ukraine. All of these things are critically important. They will help secure Ukraine on a more stable basis in the rest of Europe and looking toward the West, while also recognizing Ukraine is going to have very good and healthy ties with Russia. It's a neighbor. That's just natural. But as Lesya indicated, I think the current government now is experiencing difficulties with Russia. I think to a lot of people that's not a surprise. Probably a lot of people in this room, a lot of people in Ukraine perhaps as well. And but what I don't want to see is for Ukraine to also at the same time have difficulties with the EU and the United States. Now last week there was a letter sent by the EU Foreign Policy Head Catherine Ashton, and also signed by Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, that raised concerns from both the U.S. and EU perspectives about the direction the current government policy is taking. And it certainly makes reference to the Yulia Tymoshenko case. I myself from Washington have spoken out on a number of occasions on this case. Frankly, this is not really about her. It's not about Tymoshenko. It's about the policies of the government, and there are other people who have been subjected to similar kinds of treatment, including the former Minister of Interior and others. And so I think it's also important to underscore that for those of us who raise her case, we're doing it, frankly, less about her than about the overall policy and direction, about the treatment of opposition figures in the country and the right of opposition figures to have a say in the government and play a role in Ukraine's future, so that everyone is allowed to have a role. And so I really do hope that this delay in what was expected to be the verdict that many people are anticipating this week is an indication that the government is taking another look at this. I know the arguments that government officials make that the judicial system is independent and they're not going to interfere. If they were going to interfere, this is probably a case they should make an exception for. Because a guilty verdict is not going to help Ukraine deepen its integration with Europe. They will, in fact, make a martyr of Yulia Tymoshenko. While the numbers for the current government are going down, her numbers are going up, not soaring, I don't want to exaggerate it. But even politically what's happening doesn't make sense. So my hope is that this intervening period between the suspension of an announcement and when an announcement will finally come will lead to some rethinking and re-examination so that Ukraine can stay on a track where it gets the association and DCFTA, the free trade agreement, done, so that it continue to solidify its position with European countries. That's in Ukraine's interest, it's in U.S. interest, it's in the European Union's interest, and it's also in Russia's interest in the long term. And Russia may not see it that way now, but it will be in Russia's interest. But most importantly, it's in Ukraine's interest. And so I really do hope that we'll see the government take another look at this case and see the case beyond simply Yulia Tymoshenko, but see it for what it represents, and bring about some policies that will put it back on a positive track. So.
And now I will ask the President of Ukraine, Kyiv-Mohyla Foundation.
Not the university. To speak about education, and of course there are so many issues in Ukraine to speak about that we tend to go in that direction. I'd like to talk about education because education is not isolated, certainly not in Ukraine, from into the universities. It has become very politicized. And it's what is happening to education in Ukraine has a lot to do with the policies of the current government of Ukraine. Let me just say that 2 weeks ago I was in Ukraine, and on the way back to the United States I had an opportunity in Kyiv to speak with a representative of the European Union in Kyiv, with the representatives at the embassy of Poland and other countries. I also stopped in Spain, and as luck would have it, things just happened by themselves, and I was able to speak to some of the top people in government of Spain. And it occurred to me that in 2004 and a few years after, when people would hear the word Ukraine in the world, they would immediately say, it's the president they tried to poison, and it's the Orange Revolution. And now when you say Ukraine, I'm speaking very frankly. The first thing that they say is, oh, what's happening there? They've got that government that's really a dictatorship, and they put that Yulia Tymoshenko in jail. Frankly, everyone said to me, it's not a question of the case and the merits of the case itself. It's just that Yulia Tymoshenko has become a symbol of everything that is going wrong in the country, unfortunately. When this present administration came to power in Ukraine, the president and prime minister promised support of democracy. They reinforced their commitment to integration to the European Union. We don't see that happening at all. What is happening is the opposite. And the time has come to realize that a lot of the verbal statements and pronouncements of members of the government, all the way up and down, are really a form of, verbal Potemkin village, and we stopped believing it because we'd like to see some action. We'd like to see some real reforms. I myself have been involved in establishing a major nationwide project, the Electronic Library of Ukraine for Ukrainian universities. And we were able to establish the project with the help of USAID, with a generous grant for the first year, and we're very thankful. We started out with 3 universities, and now we have a consortium of 16 universities. We would like to extend that project to 100 universities, but we need funding, and funding should come from the government of Ukraine. Let me just explain what it means, Electronic Library of Ukraine, because we have read many statements and heard statements from the President of Ukraine and others, including the Minister of Education, that this administration supports electronic information, electronic education. The President even said that he would like to have every citizen of Ukraine to have access to electronic libraries, which is a clear statement that underscores the lack of understanding of what it means to have an electronic library. An electronic library or databases that are available to universities is not the same as having a computer or access to Google. And not even in this country does every single citizen have access to Google and the internet. So making such statements kind of diminishes the seriousness of the matter. And I fear that there aren't too many people within the government structure itself that really have an understanding of why it is important for Ukraine to have access to the world's information, which is crucial for Ukraine's educational system to be able to compete in the world, to be able to take those universities and raise them up a level, because how on earth can researchers, students and faculty in Ukraine, innovators, improve their level of work if they do not have access to what the rest of the world is doing in their areas? And it's not a question of raising the level of education of universities, it's a question of making the country competitive, and information and education is the key ingredient to take Ukraine and integrate it into the world. Now, if you'll give me just a couple more minutes, I would just like to make a comment, and this is my opinion after being in Ukraine quite often for many years, and listening now to the barrage against Minister Tabachnik. and focusing strictly on him. Because I question whether his policies of control over education and discrimination in budgetary decisions throughout the country, I question the fact whether it is only his policy or whether it is the policy of the government of Ukraine. I mean, certainly, who is running the country? The president or Mr. Tabachnik?